Sometimes the most life-changing moments begin with someone walking through the wrong door at 2 a.m. The old apartment building on Maple Street had seen better days. Paint peeled from its wooden siding like old memories trying to escape, and the front steps creaked a greeting to anyone brave enough to climb them. But for Alex, this place had become home over the past 3 months. Living alone was still new to him. His roommate David had graduated early and moved back home to help with the family business, leaving Alex with a 2-bedroom apartment that felt too big and too quiet. The silence had a weight to it, especially during those long evening hours when the world seemed to pause between day and night. But the building wasn't really quiet. If you listened carefully, you could hear life happening all around you. Mrs. Chen from apartment 2B had her evening tea ritual at exactly 6:30 every night. Alex could hear her gentle humming through the thin walls as she moved around her kitchen. The medical student upstairs, Ryan, paced back and forth while studying, his footsteps creating a steady rhythm that had become oddly comforting. And then there was the girl from across the hall. Alex didn't know her name, but he knew her schedule better than his own. She left every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 in the morning, carrying a large canvas bag that looked ready to burst with art supplies. She came back at different times, sometimes early in the afternoon, sometimes well after dark. Her apartment always smelled like coffee and something else he couldn't quite identify, something creative and alive. He'd started calling her the artist in his mind, though he'd never actually seen her work. What he had seen were the small pieces of paper that occasionally appeared under his door. Never when he was home, never with any explanation. Just small sketches of everyday things drawn with such care that they looked magical. A coffee cup with steam rising in perfect spirals. A cat sleeping in a window. Rain falling on empty streets. The first time it happened, Alex thought someone had made a mistake. He'd even knocked on a few doors, trying to return what he assumed was misdelivered mail. But nobody claimed the little drawing, and Mrs. Chen had just smiled knowingly when he asked if she'd seen anything. By the 4th sketch, Alex had stopped trying to solve the mystery. By the 10th, he'd started looking forward to finding them. Now, 3 months later, he had a small collection tucked between the pages of his psychology textbooks, 17 tiny windows into someone else's way of seeing the world. Alex was studying to become a counselor, spending his days learning about human behavior and the ways people connect with each other. It was fascinating work, but sometimes he felt like he was studying connections from the outside, like a scientist observing something he'd never quite experienced himself. He understood the theory of human relationships, but the practice still felt mysterious. His own social circle had grown smaller since starting graduate school. His high school friends had scattered across the country, following jobs and dreams and romantic partners. His classmates were friendly enough, but everyone seemed so focused on their studies that real friendships felt like a luxury nobody had time for. Most days, the highlight of Alex's social interaction was his brief conversations with Professor Martinez about research methods and therapeutic techniques. That's why the sketches had become so important to him. They felt like messages from someone who saw beauty in ordinary moments, someone who paid attention to the small details that most people missed. Whoever was leaving them had a gentle way of looking at the world that made Alex feel less alone in his own observations. The apartment building had its own rhythm, and Alex had learned to find comfort in its predictable patterns. He knew that Mrs. Chen would be cooking dinner right about now, filling the hallway with the warm smell of ginger and garlic. He knew that Ryan would start his pacing routine in about an hour, preparing for another late-night study session. And he knew that the artist would probably be getting home soon from wherever she spent her Thursday evenings. Tonight felt different, though. The air had that heavy feeling that comes before a storm, and Alex could see dark clouds gathering outside his window. The weather forecast had mentioned rain, but these clouds looked like they meant business. The kind of rain that would send people running for cover and turn the old building's gutters into waterfalls. Alex was settled at his small dining table, surrounded by textbooks and research papers. He was working on a paper about attachment theory and the ways childhood experiences shape adult relationships. It was complex material that required his full attention, but his mind kept wandering to his own experiences with connection and distance. He'd grown up in a loving family, but they'd never been the type to talk much about feelings. His parents showed care through actions rather than words, and his younger sister had always been better at making friends than he was. Alex had learned to be comfortable with solitude, but sometimes he wondered if he'd become too comfortable with it. The psychology program was teaching him about the importance of human connection for mental health and personal growth. He was learning about the ways people heal through relationships and the damage that isolation can cause. But knowing these things intellectually was different from experiencing them personally. As the first drops of rain began tapping against his window, Alex found himself thinking about the person who'd been leaving him those small gifts of art. He wondered what drove someone to share their creativity with a stranger. Was it kindness? Loneliness? A need to connect without the complications of actual conversation? He'd been tempted many times to wait by his door, to try to catch whoever was leaving the sketches. But something had always held him back. Maybe it was respect for their privacy. Or maybe it was fear that knowing the truth would somehow break the spell of mystery that had made the drawings feel so special. The rain was getting heavier now, drumming against the roof with increasing intensity. Alex could hear it rushing through the building's old gutters and splashing onto the sidewalk below. It was the kind of storm that would catch people off guard, sending them running for the nearest shelter. He turned back to his textbook, trying to focus on theories about secure attachment and emotional availability. But the storm outside was making concentration difficult. The wind had picked up, and every few minutes a particularly strong gust would rattle his windows and make the old building creak in protest. It was going to be a long night, Alex realized. The kind of night when the thin walls and creaking floors of the apartment building would feel less like barriers between neighbors and more like reminders that none of them were really alone. Even in their separate spaces, they were all riding out the same storm together. Little did Alex know that this storm would change everything, that before the night was over, the careful distance he'd maintained from his neighbors would disappear completely, and that the mystery of the sketches was about to reveal itself in a way he never could have imagined. Alex woke up to the sound of his door closing. Not opening, closing, which was strange because he was sure he'd locked it before going to bed. His heart started beating fast as he sat up in the darkness trying to figure out what had just happened. The storm was still going strong outside. Rain was hitting his window so hard it sounded like tiny rocks, and the wind was making the whole building shake. But inside his apartment, everything was too quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone is trying very hard not to make any noise. Alex reached for his phone on the nightstand, but his hand was shaking so much he almost knocked it over. The screen lit up and showed 2:17 a.m. He squinted in the sudden brightness, trying to let his eyes adjust to see better in the dark room. That's when he saw her. A figure was standing near his front door, holding something large against her chest like she was trying to protect it. Alex's first thought was to call for help, but something stopped him. The person wasn't moving toward him or acting threatening. They were just standing there completely still, like they were more scared than he was. "Hello?" Alex whispered, his voice coming out rougher than he expected. The figure jumped and he heard a small gasp. A woman's voice. "Oh no," she said quietly. "Oh no, oh no, oh no. I'm so sorry. I thought this was..." "I'm such an idiot." Alex could hear that she was crying. Not loud crying, but the kind where you're trying to hold it in and failing. He reached over and turned on his bedside lamp, squinting as the room filled with soft yellow light. The woman was young, maybe his age, with curly hair that was wet from the rain. Her clothes were soaked and she was holding what looked like a large painting or canvas. But what caught Alex's attention most was her face. She had paint smudged on her cheek and her eyes were red from crying. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, forgetting for a moment that this was a stranger in his apartment at 2 a.m. She let out a shaky laugh. "No, I'm really not okay. And I'm in your apartment, which makes this so much worse. I live across the hall and my key wasn't working. And I was soaking wet and I thought I was opening my own door. But obviously I wasn't because you're here and this isn't my couch and..." She took a deep breath. "I'm going to go now." "I'm so sorry." She turned toward the door, but Alex noticed she was shivering. Her wet clothes were dripping on his floor and she looked like she might collapse. "Wait," Alex said, getting out of bed and grabbing a sweatshirt from his chair. "You're soaked. And it's freezing out there." He handed her the sweatshirt, trying not to look too closely at what she was wearing. Her clothes were definitely wet through and she needed something warm. "I can't take your clothes," she said, but her teeth were chattering. "It's just a sweatshirt. You can give it back later." Alex went to his kitchen and put the kettle on. "Do you want some tea?" "You look like you could use something warm." She stared at him like he'd just offered to solve world hunger. "You're making me tea?" It's just tea, Alex said, suddenly feeling awkward. I make tea when I can't sleep anyway. The storm woke me up. That wasn't exactly true. She had woken him up, but it seemed rude to point that out when she was clearly having some kind of crisis. She was quiet for a long moment, just holding his sweatshirt and looking around his apartment like she was trying to figure out if this was really happening. My boyfriend and I had a fight, she said finally. Ex-boyfriend now, I guess. He said some really mean things about my art, and when I tried to leave, he wouldn't give me my keys back. He said I was being dramatic and that I should just stay and talk it out, but I couldn't stay there anymore. So I grabbed this painting and just ran. She gestured to the canvas she'd been protecting. Even in the dim light, Alex could see it was covered with a cloth to keep it dry. I've been working on this piece for months. It's for my senior exhibition, and if something happened to it... She started crying again, but quietly. Alex didn't know what to say. He wasn't good at comforting people, even though he was studying to become a counselor. In textbooks, there were clear steps for helping someone in crisis. In real life, standing in his kitchen at 2 a.m. with a crying stranger, all those steps seemed useless. The kettle started whistling, giving him something to do with his hands. He made 2 cups of tea, adding extra honey to hers because she looked like she needed the sugar. Here, he said, handing her the warm mug. And seriously, put on the sweatshirt. You're going to get sick. She finally pulled his sweatshirt over her head. It was way too big for her, which somehow made her look younger and more vulnerable. She wrapped her hands around the tea mug like it was the most precious thing in the world. Thank you, she said. I don't even know your name and you're being so nice to me. I'm Alex, he said. And you don't have to thank me. Anyone would do the same thing. She shook her head. No, they wouldn't. Most people would have called the police by now. Alex realized she was probably right. Finding a stranger in your apartment in the middle of the night wasn't exactly a normal situation, but something about her didn't feel dangerous. She felt lost maybe and definitely upset but not scary. I'm Casey, she said, and I'm the person who's been leaving drawings under your door. Alex nearly dropped his tea mug. That's you? Casey nodded, looking embarrassed. I know it's weird. I don't know. I see you around the building sometimes and you always look so thoughtful. Like you're seeing things other people miss. And I wanted to share something with someone who might understand it, but I was too shy to actually talk to you. Alex stared at her, trying to process this information. The mystery artist who had been brightening his days for months was sitting in his living room, wearing his sweatshirt and looking nothing like he had imagined. I love those drawings, he said. I kept every single one. Casey's eyes went wide. Really? You didn't throw them away? Throw them away? They're beautiful. I look forward to finding them. For the first time since she'd appeared in his apartment, Casey smiled. It was a small smile, but it changed her whole face. I thought you might think I was crazy, she said. Alex shook his head. I thought they were the best part of living here. They stood in his kitchen drinking tea and looking at each other like they were trying to solve a puzzle. The storm was still raging outside, but inside Alex's apartment something had shifted. The careful distance between neighbors was disappearing, replaced by something Alex didn't have a name for yet. Casey ended up staying until dawn, and Alex was surprised by how natural it felt. After the initial awkwardness wore off, they found themselves talking like old friends catching up after years apart. Casey curled up in one corner of his small couch, still wearing his oversized sweatshirt, while Alex sat in his desk chair with his feet up on the coffee table. Can I see it? Alex asked, nodding toward the painting Casey had been protecting so carefully. She looked uncertain. It's not finished yet, and after what happened tonight, I'm not even sure it's any good. What did your ex say about it? Casey's face darkened. He said it was pretentious, that I was trying too hard to be deep and meaningful, and that real art should be more accessible. He said people would look at it and think I was just showing off. Alex could hear the hurt in her voice, and it made him angry on her behalf. He didn't know anything about art, but he knew that the small sketches Casey had been leaving him were anything but pretentious. They were honest and beautiful and made him see ordinary things in extraordinary ways. He sounds like he doesn't know what he's talking about, Alex said. Casey laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Maybe, or maybe he's right. Maybe I am just fooling myself about being an artist. Show me the painting, Alex said. I'll give you an honest opinion. Casey studied his face for a long moment, like she was trying to decide if she could trust him. Finally, she reached for the canvas and carefully pulled away the cloth covering. Alex's breath caught in his throat. The painting was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It showed two figures sitting in separate rooms, but somehow the walls between them seemed transparent. You could see the loneliness in their posture, but also something else, a kind of reaching across the empty space, an invisible connection that made the distance between them feel both vast and non-existent at the same time. "Casey," Alex said quietly, "this is incredible." "Really?" she asked, and he could hear the vulnerability in her voice. "Really, it's like you painted something I felt but never had words for." Casey's eyes filled with tears, but this time they looked like good tears. "That's exactly what I was trying to do. I wanted to capture that feeling when you're alone but not really alone, when you know there are other people out there feeling the same things you're feeling, even if you can't see them or talk to them." Alex looked at the painting again, understanding now why Casey had been so determined to protect it. This wasn't just a school project or a piece of art. This was her way of making sense of the world, of finding connection in a place that often felt isolating. "Is that why you started leaving the drawings?" Alex asked. Casey nodded. "I guess I wanted to reach across that invisible space. I wanted to share something beautiful with someone who might understand it. I see you sometimes coming home from school or getting your mail, and you always look like you're thinking about big things, like you see more than just the surface of everything." Alex was quiet for a moment, processing this. He'd spent so much time studying human behavior and wondering why real connections felt so difficult to make. But Casey had found a way to connect without even speaking. She'd been reaching across the space between them for months, one small drawing at a time. "I kept them all," Alex said again. "They're in my psychology textbooks. Sometimes when I'm studying about human relationships and feeling like I don't understand anything about how people actually connect with each other, I look at your drawings and remember that connection doesn't always have to be complicated." Casey shifted on the couch so she was facing him more directly. "You're studying psychology?" "Yeah, I want to be a counselor. I'm trying to learn how to help people work through difficult things, but honestly, most of the time I feel like I'm just memorizing theories about stuff I don't really understand." "What kind of theories?" Alex found himself talking about attachment styles and the ways childhood experiences shape adult relationships. He told her about his research on therapeutic techniques and his worries about whether he'd ever be good at helping people in crisis. Casey listened with the same intense attention she probably gave to her art, asking questions that showed she really understood what he was saying. "You know," Casey said when he paused, "what you're doing right now is exactly what a good counselor would do." "What do you mean?" "You found me in your apartment having a complete breakdown, and instead of calling security or asking me to leave, you made me tea and listened to me. You asked about my art and actually looked at it like it mattered. You made me feel less alone." Alex hadn't thought about it that way. He'd just been responding to someone who needed help. But maybe that was exactly the point. Maybe being a good counselor wasn't about memorizing techniques, but about recognizing when someone needed care and providing it in whatever way felt natural. As the sun started to rise, filling Alex's apartment with soft morning light, both of them realized they'd been awake all night. But neither felt tired. If anything, Alex felt more awake than he had in months. Talking to Casey was like discovering a new language he'd always wanted to learn but never thought he could. "I should probably go," Casey said, looking toward the window. "You need to get ready for school, and I need to figure out my situation with my apartment and everything else." Alex didn't want her to leave, but he understood. The night had been intense and unexpected, and they both needed time to process what had happened between them. "Keep the sweatshirt for now," Alex said. "You can give it back later." Casey smiled, and Alex realized he wanted to see that smile again as soon as possible. "Alex," she said as she gathered up her painting, "thank you for letting me stay, and for looking at my art like it mattered. I haven't felt this good about my work in months." After Casey left, Alex sat in his quiet apartment and tried to understand what had just happened. In one night, the mystery of the drawings had been solved, but more than that, he discovered something about connection that all his textbooks had never managed to explain. Sometimes the most profound understanding between people happens not through careful analysis or planned interaction, but through simple presence in moments when someone needs it most. The next few weeks changed everything for both Alex and Casey, but in ways that surprised everyone around them. Their friends kept asking if they were dating, and both of them would get this confused look and say not exactly, before trying to explain something that didn't really have a name. It started the day after that stormy night. Alex was getting ready for his morning psychology class when he heard a soft knock on his door. When he opened it, Casey was standing there with his sweatshirt folded neatly in her arms and a small paper bag. "I brought you coffee," she said, looking a bit nervous, "and some of those pastries from the bakery downtown. I wanted to thank you properly for last night." Alex invited her in, and they ended up sitting at his small dining table, sharing breakfast and talking about their plans for the day. It felt so natural that when Casey mentioned she had a big painting session planned, Alex found himself offering his apartment as a workspace. "My place has better light in the morning," he said, "and it's quieter than yours." Casey's apartment shared a wall with the building's laundry room, which meant she had to deal with the sound of washing machines and dryers all day long. Alex's place faced the courtyard, where the only sounds were birds singing and the occasional conversation between neighbors. "Are you sure?" Casey asked. "I can be pretty messy when I paint, and the smell of the paints might bother you." Alex shrugged. "I like the smell of art supplies. It reminds me of elementary school art class when everything seemed possible." So Casey started bringing her easel and paints to Alex's apartment. At first, she was careful to clean up everything and make sure she didn't disturb his study routine. But after a few days, they both realized that working in the same space actually helped both of them focus better. Casey would set up her easel by the big window in Alex's living room, where the morning light made her paintings glow like they were lit from within. Alex would spread his psychology textbooks across the dining table, taking notes and working on assignments while listening to the gentle sound of Casey's paintbrush moving across canvas. They developed a rhythm that felt like they'd been doing it for years instead of days. Casey would arrive around 9 in the morning with coffee for both of them. They'd work in comfortable silence for a few hours, occasionally sharing a thought or asking for an opinion. Around noon, they'd take a break to make lunch together, talking about their projects and plans for the afternoon. Alex's friends from school started noticing changes in him. He seemed more relaxed, more confident in class discussions. When Professor Martinez asked about his research project on therapeutic relationships, Alex found himself talking about the importance of creating safe spaces where people could be completely honest without fear of judgment. "It sounds like you've been doing some practical research on this topic," Professor Martinez said after class one day. "Would you like to share what you've learned?" Alex thought about Casey painting in his living room, how she'd started showing him works in progress and asking for his thoughts. He thought about the way they'd begun sharing stories about their childhoods, their fears, their dreams for the future. "I think I'm learning that real connection happens when you stop trying so hard to connect," Alex said. "When you just share space with someone and let understanding develop naturally." Meanwhile, Casey's art was changing too. Her professor, Dr. Williams, noticed it immediately when Casey brought in her latest piece for critique. "There's something different about your recent work," Dr. Williams said, studying the canvas with interest. "It's more confident, more emotionally honest. What's changed in your process?" Casey glanced around the classroom, aware that other students were listening. "I guess I've been working in a different environment. Somewhere I feel more comfortable being myself." "That shows," Dr. Williams said. "This piece has a vulnerability that your earlier work was reaching for but never quite achieved. Whatever you're doing differently, keep doing it." Casey's classmates started asking about her new workspace, and she found herself trying to explain her arrangement with Alex. But every time she tried to describe it, people got the wrong idea. "So you're basically living together?" her friend Mia asked during lunch at the campus cafe. "No, we both have our own apartments," Casey said. "We just work together sometimes." "But you spend every day at his place?" "Not every day, and it's not like that. We just work well in the same space." Mia raised an eyebrow. "Casey, you're describing a relationship." But Casey knew it wasn't that simple. What she and Alex had didn't fit into the usual categories. They weren't dating in any traditional sense. They'd never kissed or held hands or talked about being exclusive. But they'd created something together that felt more intimate than many romantic relationships Casey had seen. They'd started grocery shopping together, not because they'd planned it, but because they'd run into each other at the store and realized they were buying similar things. They'd begun watching old movies together on Friday nights, sharing the couch and a bowl of popcorn while discussing the psychology of the characters or the artistic choices of the directors. Alex found himself looking forward to Casey's arrival each morning almost more than anything else in his day, not because he was romantic about her, but because her presence made everything feel more alive. When she painted, she brought an energy into his space that made his own work feel more meaningful. Casey discovered that having Alex nearby while she worked gave her a confidence she'd never experienced before. Knowing that someone understood and appreciated what she was trying to create made her willing to take bigger risks, to put more of herself into each piece. Their neighbors in the building started referring to them as a unit. Mrs. Chen would ask Alex how you and your young lady were doing. Ryan from upstairs would invite you both to join him for pizza when he was taking study breaks. But the most significant change was in how they talked to each other. The polite distance that most people maintain, even with close friends, had completely disappeared between them. They could sit in comfortable silence for hours, or talk deeply about things they'd never shared with anyone else. One evening, as Casey was cleaning her brushes and Alex was putting away his textbooks, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Can I ask you something?" She said, "Of course, and do you think what we have is weird? The way we spend time together, but we're not, you know?" Alex considered the question seriously. "I think it's unusual," he said finally. "But I don't think unusual means weird. I think it means we found something that works for us, even if it doesn't look like what other people expect." Casey nodded, looking relieved. "I was worried you might think I was taking advantage of your space or your friendship." "Casey," Alex said, "you've made my life better in ways I didn't even know were possible. I hope you know that." She smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and made the whole room feel warmer. "You've done the same for me." As winter turned to spring, their unusual arrangement continued to evolve. They'd created their own definition of intimacy, one based on understanding rather than romance, on shared space rather than shared promises about the future, and somehow it felt more real and more sustainable than any conventional relationship either of them had experienced. The senior art exhibition was scheduled for the last Friday in April, and Casey had been working toward it for months. But as the date approached, she found herself dealing with anxiety in ways she'd never experienced before. This wasn't just about getting a good grade or impressing her professors. This exhibition would determine whether she could see herself as a real artist or just someone who'd spent 4 years playing with paints. Alex noticed the change in Casey's energy about 2 weeks before the exhibition. She was still coming to his apartment every morning, but instead of the calm focus he'd grown used to, she was restless and worried. She'd start paintings and then abandon them. She'd stare at her finished pieces with doubt clouding her face. "What if nobody understands what I'm trying to say?" she asked one morning, standing in front of the painting that had brought her to Alex's door that stormy night. She'd been working on it for months, adding layers and details that made it more complex and beautiful each time Alex saw it. "What if they do understand and they don't like it?" she continued, not waiting for Alex to answer the first question. Alex looked up from his psychology textbook, where he'd been reading about performance anxiety and creative blocks. "Casey, can I tell you something?" She turned away from the painting, giving him her attention. 3 months ago, I was reading about therapeutic relationships and feeling like I understood nothing about how people actually connect with each other. I was memorizing theories and techniques, but it all felt academic and distant. Casey sat down across from him at the dining table, curious about where this was going. "Then you showed up in my apartment in the middle of a storm and everything changed. Not because you taught me anything directly, but because you showed me what real connection looks like. You've been reaching out to people through your art for months, maybe years. You've been creating bridges between the isolated spaces where people live." Alex gestured toward the painting Casey had been worrying about. "That piece you're so nervous about? It's not just paint on canvas. It's proof that someone else understands what it feels like to be alone in a crowded world. When people see it, they're going to recognize something true about their own experience." Casey was quiet for a long moment, absorbing what Alex had said. "How do you know?" "Because that's what your art has done for me. Every single sketch you left under my door made me feel less alone. That painting over there helped me understand something about human connection that 2 years of graduate school hadn't taught me." The day of the exhibition, Alex helped Casey transport her pieces to the campus gallery. She decided to display 5 paintings, including the one from that stormy night, which she'd titled Between Spaces. As they hung the pieces on the white gallery walls, Alex watched Casey transform from nervous artist to confident professional. "They look perfect," Alex said as Casey made final adjustments to the lighting on her centerpiece. They look terrifying, Casey replied, but she was smiling. The exhibition opening was scheduled for 7 p.m., and Alex had planned to arrive early to support Casey. But when he got to the gallery at 6:30, there was already a small crowd gathering around Casey's section of the exhibition. Alex found Casey standing to the side, watching people examine her work with an expression of amazement on her face. "They're actually looking at them," she whispered to Alex when he joined her. "And they're talking about them like they understand what I was trying to do." Alex followed her gaze and saw a middle-aged woman standing in front of Between Spaces with tears in her eyes. A young man was taking a photo of another piece, carefully framing the shot like he wanted to remember every detail. Two students were having an animated discussion about Casey's use of color in space. Dr. Williams approached them with a pleased expression. "Casey, I wanted you to know that we've already had 3 inquiries about purchasing pieces from your collection. The response has been remarkable." Casey looked stunned. "People want to buy them?" "They want to live with them," Dr. Williams said. "That's the highest compliment an artist can receive." As the evening progressed, Alex watched Casey talk with visitors about her work. She'd started the night nervous and uncertain, but with each conversation she became more confident in her artistic voice. She explained her process and inspiration with growing enthusiasm, no longer worried about whether people would understand her vision. Near the end of the evening, Alex found himself standing alone in front of Between Spaces. The painting had evolved significantly since that first night when Casey had showed it to him in his apartment. The 2 figures were still there, still in their separate rooms, but the walls between them had become more transparent. You could see now that they were reaching toward each other, that the space between them was filled with possibility rather than emptiness. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Alex turned to find Casey beside him, looking at her own work with satisfaction rather than anxiety. "It's perfect," Alex said. "It tells the whole story." "What story is that?" Alex thought about the question, considering everything that had happened between them since that stormy night. The story of how people find each other, how connection happens not by tearing down walls but by making them transparent, how you can be completely yourself and completely known at the same time. Casey smiled, and Alex realized that this was what resolution looked like, not a dramatic declaration or a life-changing moment, but a quiet understanding that something important had been completed. "The exhibition committee wants me to write an artist's statement for the catalog," Casey said. "Something about my inspiration and process. But I don't know how to explain that my best work came from accidentally walking into the wrong apartment in the middle of a storm." Alex laughed. "Maybe you don't explain it. Maybe you just say that art happens when you stop protecting yourself from unexpected connections." As they walked home together through the warm spring evening, Alex thought about how much had changed since that night in November. They still lived in separate apartments across the hall from each other. They still maintained their individual lives and goals, but the space between them had been transformed into something rich and meaningful. They'd proven that intimacy didn't require romance, that deep understanding could exist without conventional commitment. They'd created their own definition of relationship, one that honored both connection and independence. At their apartment building, they paused at the top of the stairs, neither quite ready to end the evening. "Alex," Casey said. "Yeah?" "Thank you for letting me into your space that night, and for letting me stay." Alex smiled, understanding that she wasn't just talking about the physical space of his apartment, but about the emotional space they'd created together. "Thank you for trusting me with your art," he said, "and for showing me what real connection looks like." They went to their separate apartments, but the space between their doors no longer felt empty. It felt full of understanding, of shared experience, of the quiet knowledge that some of the best relationships in life are the ones that don't fit into predefined categories. Casey had found her artistic voice, and Alex had discovered what it really meant to help someone through difficult times. Most importantly, they'd both learned that the most profound connections sometimes begin with the simple act of making space for another person when they need it most.